In the 1820s and 30s, a bunch of young men came out of St. Louis to trap for beaver fur for the hat industry back in the East and back in London. It was kind of the first gold rush in the American West. And what they stayed up here to trap. They stayed in the mountains year-round, first non-natives to stay in the mountains year-round. They very much adapted the native lifestyle and even some of their culture. Some of them married into the Indian tribes. So they were here, they stayed here year-round. So once a year, a supply caravan would come from St. Louis, the closest supplies, bring supplies up to them. They would meet at a designated spot that they called rendezvous, where they would trade for goods for the coming year for furs that they had trapped the past year. And this went on for 16 years, from 1825 to 1840. This spot right here became one of the most prominent locations for rendezvous. And rendezvous, what they really needed is, you're talking hundreds of mountain men and traders coming, thousands of Indians attending these rendezvous, and then the livestock was tremendous. One of the most prominent tribes was the Shoshone that would come to these rendezvous, and they had, you know, probably as many as 5 or 10 horses per person. So if several thousand of the Shoshone came, there may be 10,000 horses out here. So what they needed for a location for a camp spot or for the rendezvous spot is they needed water, they needed wood, but most importantly, they needed grass for their livestock. And this, as you can see, this wide open plain for many miles along here has plenty of grass for the horses. And so this, in 1833, was the first rendezvous that was held here. And after that, 6 of the last 8 rendezvous were held right here. And I think it was mainly because of the grass that was available and the water and the camping area. These rendezvous would last as much as a month, and so that puts a lot of pressure on the grass, and so they needed a lot of it. So this became the spot for rendezvous. 6 of the 16 were held right here. The Green River, just about a mile beyond us here, the Green River runs into the Horse Creek, or Horse Creek runs into the Green River, and that was kind of the marking spot. But they camped 5 miles upriver and 5 miles downriver, at least in the 1833 rendezvous that's described. So you can come here to this Trapper's Point and you can see the original rendezvous grounds. We have some interpretive signs here. This is some of the interpretation at Trapper's Point. You can see we got some interpretation signs here. We've got this nice mural of Alfred Jacob Miller paintings. So the gentleman on the right is Bill Burroughs, who was a mountain man that Alfred Jacob Miller painted or drew in 1837. And on the left is a Shoshone Indian that he drew, and the sketch came from 1837. So we think they framed the whole thing really well. We ended up putting a glass panel here so that you could sit here and read the interpretation, but also see the rendezvous grounds in the background. Some of the things that happened at these rendezvous, the 1833 rendezvous was kind of famous. That was one of the biggest rendezvous, but it was kind of famous because that's the year the rabid wolf came into camps one night and attacked a few people. There was even a man who was attacked and went crazy and took off, and nobody ever saw him again. And so that was kind of the excitement of the 33 rendezvous. 1835 was the next rendezvous that was held here. That one was famous because some of the first missionaries came that year. Parker and Whitman both came that year. And so the 1835 rendezvous, one of the big stories of that year, one of the legends that come out of it is young Kit Carson was here, and there was a Frenchman by the name of Chenard, and the Chenard was kind of being a bully, and he thought he could whip anybody, and he was challenging everybody to a fight. And so Kit Carson told him just to shut him up, took on the fight, and they came at each other with guns, fired their guns at the same time at each other, and Kit Carson's bullet went through the hand of Chenard and up his arm a little bit. And Chenard's bullet went over Kit Carson's head, and that kind of shut up the bully. But that was the big event of that rendezvous. 1836 rendezvous that was held here. That was the year that the missionary women came for the first time. So Eliza Spalding and Narcissa Whitman came, and that was unusual for the Indian. They stood out. It was unusual for the Indians and unusual for the mountain men to have white women come into the rendezvous. And so that was the big story. The Indians especially were fascinated by these ladies. 1837 was the next rendezvous here. That was well known because William Drummond Stewart, the nobleman from Scotland, brought Alfred Jacob Miller, who was an artist, and he painted pictures of the rendezvous. That's the only first-hand visual images we have of that rendezvous era of those mountain men, and so we use that artwork a lot to try to interpret how these guys really acted and looked. So the 1839 and 40 rendezvous, those were the last two rendezvous. The era was starting to wind down at that point. Both those times, more missionary couples came to both of those rendezvous. But what's notable in the 1840 rendezvous is Joel Walker brought his, and he was not a missionary, but Joel Walker came along and brought his wife and 4 kids. And so that's really the first family, you could really say, that was immigrating west. They were headed to California. And so that was kind of a precursor to the immigrants trails and the immigrant movement that would have come just a few short years after that, by 1842-43 time frame. Also 1840 is the first year the Catholic priest, Father de Smet, came. All the missionaries before that had been of the Protestant faiths, and then in 1840, Father de Smet came. And right behind me, it's hard to see, but there's a point of land that jots out right where the Horse Creek and Green River come together, and that's right about where the first Catholic Mass was held in the Rocky Mountains. And so this is a great place if you want to see where the rendezvous really happened and where some of the most famous stories of the rendezvous happened. This is a place you should come and visit.